right, thank you for joining me. Let's get started by using a pencil to trace the outline of the hand. So just put your hand flat on your piece of white paper and then carefully use the pencil to outline all of your fingers. There we go. And then you'll have a tracing of your hand on the paper. Now what we're going to do is we're going to assign one of the Pacific salmon species to each of the 5 fingers of the hand. And we're going to sketch the salmon as they would look when they're spawning adults, returning to the fresh water. So here's the sketch of the start of our first salmon on the thumb. So you'll want to think about what salmon's name rhymes with thumb, and let's make the mouth a little bigger here. They have very big teeth. So there's some nice big teeth there on our thumb. I'm going to grab my colored pencils. All right, we can start putting some colors in. These salmon, dark backs, and then they have a really pretty, almost tiger stripe shape along their body on the sides. And these will be a dark green-brown color, as well as even with some red on the underside of the salmon. And once again, this is what these fish look like when they're ready to spawn. So when they're ready to come back from the ocean into the freshwater to lay and fertilize their eggs. All right, so you might have guessed it. This is the chum salmon. So your thumb represents the chum. All right, let's move on now to your pointer finger. So this finger represents a salmon whose name sounds kind of like what could happen if you're talking really excitedly, but then you have your finger out and you're pointing at something, but if you're not careful, you might accidentally poke someone in the eye. So another older word for like hitting something is to sock something. So this salmon sounds a lot like what might happen if you socked someone in the eye. So think about which of the 5 species of Pacific salmon that kind of sounds like. Here I'm putting in the colors of this beautiful fish. Nice green heads and red bodies. And once again, this is what they look like when they come back from the ocean. So this, you might have guessed it, is a sockeye salmon. And that's the fish that our pointer finger is going to represent. These fish are one of the only salmon that actually the babies, instead of living in the creeks and rivers, they will rear in the lake. So this is the sockeye salmon. Next, we're going to go to our biggest finger for the biggest salmon. Can you remember which of the 5 species of Pacific salmon is the biggest? There's the eye and the fins. So this is the Chinook salmon, also called the king salmon. And let's get his colors in here. So these are by far the biggest of our Pacific salmon species, and that's because they can stay in the ocean for the longest. So they'll stay in the ocean eating and growing for actually up to 8 years. They usually stay for about 3 to 4 years in the ocean, but yeah, they can stay out there for quite a few years. So when they come back, a fish that stayed in the ocean eating for 8 years is going to be a very big and impressive fish. So the world record for the biggest Chinook salmon It's actually 126 pounds, so almost 130 pounds. It's a huge fish. It's about 5 feet long. Very big and impressive fish. Putting some spots on the fins and on the back of this fish. So yeah, this is the Chinook salmon, the king salmon, on your pointer finger. Oops, sorry, not your pointer finger, on your middle finger. Some more color in here. All right, so let's go on to the ring finger. So we often will wear jewelry on our ring fingers, and that jewelry can usually be either gold or silver. So this salmon can be called one of those things. Have you heard of a Pacific salmon species before that's either gold or silver? Which one? All right, so this salmon is called a silver salmon or a coho salmon. They have, when they're getting ready to spawn, they have some green and kind of a darker green color, and also some of that bright red on the coho or silver salmon. A lot of these fish have more than one name because they're such a widespread and important species of fish. Everywhere that people have lived, where these fish have also lived, they've been really important for the people's culture, for the people's food source and survival. So these fish have a lot of different names. And we'll go through and talk about some of those other names once we're done putting each of the fish in. So here is our coho or silver salmon. And finally, we have our smallest salmon, which is on the pinky finger. That's also a pretty big clue for the name of this fish. Let's see if any of you remember it. See how this fish's shape is a little bit different. It has a big deep body with a hump on its back. All right, so this is the pink salmon. You can remember it because it's the smallest fish and it kind of sounds like the pinky. When it's spawning, it'll have this nice greenish blue color. It's a little bit more blue than some of the other fish. And it can even have just a little bit of pink on its belly. Put in some pink there. But usually its belly is bright white. And they will also have spots. Let's add some spots on the tail, on the adipose fin, on the dorsal fin, all along the back. These fish also have a lot of spots, like the Chinook salmon does too. Give them some more spots even. You know, the coho salmon also has some spots, but just on the top part of its tail and along its back. All right, so those are each of our 5 Pacific species of salmon. So let's see if you remember. Go ahead and write the name of each of these fish. So the thumb represents, you can go and say it ahead and say it with me, the thumb represents the chum salmon. The pointer finger represents the sockeye salmon. The middle finger, the biggest finger, represents the king salmon, the biggest salmon. The ring finger represents the silver salmon. And the pinky, the smallest finger, represents the pink salmon. And I mentioned that a lot of these fish have more than one name, so I'll just go ahead and write 2 of them that have other common names. So the silver salmon This ring finger here is very commonly called a coho salmon. Probably heard me say that. And the king salmon, the middle finger, the biggest one, is also called the chinook. All right, so something that we can do now that we've finished our hand, just carefully add the outline and black pen to these fish and to the shape of the hand. And then, if you'd like, you can think about what color you might want to color in the hand shape. I think for me, I want my salmon to have a nice environment to live in, to keep all of this 5 species of Pacific salmon healthy. So I think I'm going to make my hand a nice blue color to represent. Do you guys remember what sort of water these fish want? They want fresh and salt water, but there's something about the water that they're going to want at all stages of their life cycle. Yeah, these fish are going to want water that is clean, cold, and clear. So I'm going to color my hand in blue to represent that clean, cold, and clear water. It's very nice water for these Pacific salmon. So you can think all 5 of these salmon live in the Skagit River. So we want to keep the water in the Skagit River clean and cold and clear so that it's a good environment. And all of these salmon can continue to stay healthy and continue to live in the Skagit River. All right, that was coming in blue, and you can color your hand whatever color you'd like for the environment. Maybe you want it to be blue for the water like I do, or you might want it to be green for the plants that contribute to the ecosystem and help keep the water clean and clear when these fish are returning to spawn. You might even remember that the fish like to spawn in gravel, so you might want to add some gravel or some plants or anything like that. But for my picture, I'm just going to have my hand be blue for the clean, clear, and cold water. All right, I think that looks pretty nice. Thank you for joining me.